Hey guys, welcome back to FixItPhillip. Thanks for watching. Thank you for those that are subscribed to the channel. If you haven't subscribed yet, I would encourage you to do so and hit that button below. I'd really appreciate it. Today we have a 2003 Acura Mdx with a 3.5 liter VTEC engine. It's a J series motor, and this car, every time you start it up, it has misfire codes. It'll pull up misfires for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So there's codes for all 6 cylinders misfiring, and a P0300, which is a random misfire as well. It happens more when the engine's cold. When you first start it in the morning, it'll run a little bit rough, and as it gets warmer, it'll run better and better. It has 177,000 miles. I don't think this vehicle's had a valve adjustment before, so that's what we're going to do today, is take off the upper intake manifold, take off the valve covers, get access to the rocker arms, and adjust the valves. And I'm going to show you guys how to do it. Now, these engines, over time, the exhaust valve adjustment tends to get tighter and tighter, and the intake side tends to get looser. So I'm expecting that. So probably gonna have really tight exhaust lash, and really tight, or really loose I should say, intake valve lash. So we'll tear it apart and see what we find out. So for the valve lash adjustment specs, we got our information here on the engine sticker here. Valve lash, again, you want to check it when it's cold. Intake valves is 0.22 millimeters plus or minus 0.02 millimeters, and exhaust is 0.30 millimeters plus or minus 0.02 millimeters. So if you're looking at the motor, the 6 valves here that are closest to the center, closest to the intake manifold, are the intake valves, and the 6 valves down here closest to the exhaust manifold are the exhaust valves. Same thing over here, closest to the intake is intake valves, closest to the exhaust manifold is exhaust valves. So on the camshaft cover here, closest to the front of the vehicle, closest to the radiator, you have a little round plug you can pop off, and we're going to turn the crankshaft, and as we turn it, there's a little mark right here on the actual plastic. It's like a point. As we turn it, we're going to see marks on the actual camshaft sprocket. We're going to line up those marks, and right above that mark there's going to be a number. So when you get to those numbers, say it's 5 for example, we line that up, and we're going to adjust the intake and the exhaust valves on number 5 cylinder. And I got this cool little camera right here. It's called an endoscope, or I think you can call it a bore scope as well. So I have that hooked up so you can see a little bit better. So here's that mark on the plastic cover, And we're going to turn the crankshaft on the bottom just with a 19mm socket and an extension and a 1/2" ratchet. And as the camshaft turns, we'll see a number pop up here, and we'll adjust that particular cylinder, whatever number it is. So I'll set this here. Okay, here's the passenger side wheel well. We got the 19mm socket through this little inspection hole to a 1/2" ratchet that's connected to the crankshaft pulley. So we're going to turn this clockwise, and here's the camera I have here of the camshaft in the front by the radiator. And we're going to turn this until it lines up. So here comes number 6. I don't know if you can see that. So number 6, here's the mark on the cam. We're going to line it up with the plastic mark here on the cam cover. Right there. So that's lined up. So now we can adjust number 6 cylinder intake and exhaust valves. Okay, so here's the cylinder number identification for this motor. Front of the motor, which is over here. So we got 1, 2, 3 in the back. Cylinder 1, 2, 3. And we have 4, 5, 6 in the front. 4, 5, and 6. So right now we have it on number 6. So we're going to adjust the intake valves and the exhaust valves on number 6 cylinder. Once we do that, we'll crank the crankshaft again clockwise, and we'll get it to each other number and adjust the valves on the other cylinders as well. Okay, on these J series Hondas, the intake valves have a tendency to get looser over time, and the exhaust valves tend to get tighter. So the lash, or the gap in between the rocker arm and the valve, gets tighter on the exhaust and looser on the intake. So for the intake, I have a feeler gauge here. You can barely see it, but mine is a 0.229mm feeler gauge, and the specs for the intake was 0.22 plus or minus 0.02 millimeters, so we are good. So we're just going to put the feeler gauge in between the rocker arm and the valve stem, and as you can see on this one, it's super loose. It's supposed to have a little bit of drag, and this one is pretty loose. So what we're going to do is loosen the 10mm lock nut here. Then we can use a flathead screwdriver, and we can either loosen it counterclockwise to make it looser. This one is too loose, so we're going to turn it clockwise and tighten it up. And once we get this where we like it, we're going to hold the screwdriver in place where the measurement's good, and then we're going to put a 10mm wrench back on here and tighten up the lock nut. Okay, here's the 10mm wrench. Here's our screwdriver. We're going to hold that in place as we loosen it. And we're going to tighten this down to where we have a little bit of a drag. And again, you kind of get a feel for it over time. You definitely don't want them too tight. Okay, it's a little bit too tight. And you want to try to hold this level without twisting it, so you can get the proper feel for it. That feels good there. Just a little bit of drag. So we'll hold this in place and tighten it back up. Snug it down, and then we'll double check it and see how it feels. So like I said, just a little bit of drag, so that's perfect. Okay, next one. Really loose. Back it off a little bit. Just take your time on these. There we go. Okay, so intake is done. Now we can do the 2 on the exhaust on number 6. Okay, so for the lash for the exhaust is calling for 0.30 millimeters plus or minus 0.02. And my feeler gauge here, again, you can kind of barely see it, but this one's 0.305 millimeters, so we're good on this one. See, this one feels pretty tight. So let's check it and see how they measure out here. See, this one I can't even get it in. So that one's tight. Let's see this one. Yep, even this one's too tight. That actually feels good right there. Maybe just a tad bit looser. Yep, that's good right there. And we'll lock this back down. Okay, that feels good. A little bit of a drag. So this side's really tight, so we're gonna loosen this one also. Still tight. Okay, that feels good there. Okay, that feels good. Okay, so number 6 is done. 2 intake and 2 exhaust. So now I just gotta do the rest. Okay, I'm gonna turn the crankshaft clockwise again. Number 6 is done. And what's next? Number 1. Okay, so we'll do number 1 next. Number 1 intake valve. The first one here I'm checking is super loose. Okay, number 1 is done. The exhaust valves were really tight and the intake valves were really loose. So that's all done. So let's go to the next one. Here comes 4. Okay, number 4. Okay, this one's really loose. This one's really loose. Okay, both exhaust valves on number 4 are really tight too. Alright, so number 4 is done. So let's crank it some more and go to the next one. Okay, so cylinder number 2 is next. Okay, number 2. Intake valve is super loose here and super loose here, and the exhaust feels really tight. There's not even any lash. There's no gap in between the rocker arm and the valve. So those are definitely too tight on the exhaust. Okay, cylinder number 2 is done, so we'll go to the next one. Okay, so now we'll do cylinder number 5. Way too loose. Way too loose. So we'll tighten up the 2 intake valves on number 5. And there is no lash on this at all. This one's super tight. This one's tight as well. So way too tight. Okay, so we did cylinder 6, 1, 4, 2, and 5 we just finished. So we should have one more, number 3. Okay, so number 3 and we'll be done. Okay, number 3 intake valves. That one's too loose. That one's too loose. Which, same thing on this one, exhaust is too tight. Okay, so that feels good. So the exhaust valves are done on cylinder number 3. So now we can put the valve covers back on. If your valve cover gaskets are bad, make sure you change them. We're gonna put the intake back on and we'll fire it up. Okay, it's all put back together. Oil level's good, coolant's topped off. Just gotta put the engine cover back on. And remember to take out the ratchet with the 19mm socket and extension out of the fender well there. You don't want to leave that on there. So let's fire it up and see how it sounds. Sounds smooth to me. Okay, so I had cleared the codes before starting it back up after the valve adjustment. I was reading the live misfires and didn't see any misfires on cold startup at all, which is good. They were triggering like crazy before. No fault codes detected, so let's give it a drive, see how it feels. All right, I'm giving it a good test drive. And man, what a difference. This thing is nice and smooth. It's not triggering any more misfires at all. A lot more power. So this one has 176,895 miles. I know it's pretty typical on these Honda V6 engines to do the valve adjustment. I believe it's around 100,000 miles. So this was almost double past due. So yeah, big difference. No misfire codes. Just scan it one more time here, just to double check without crashing. Yep, no fault codes detected. Oh, peacocks. Huh. All right, so that's it for this video. I almost hit a couple peacocks, but I hope you enjoyed the video, and hopefully it helps you guys out. Be sure to hit that subscribe button below, and remember, with Fix It Phillip, you can fix it. I'll see you next time.